Samson killed 1,000 men using only the jawbone of a donkey. That single fact changes everything we think we know about the judges of Israel. He was not an ordinary hero. He was a Nazirite from before his birth. Judges chapter 13, verse 5, declares it without ambiguity. God himself commanded his mother never to cut his hair. His mother was barren. That matters. The Bible repeats that pattern with purpose. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah. God always acts where humanity can no longer. The angel of the Lord appeared to the wife of Manoah in Judges chapter 13, verse 3. He announced that she would conceive a son. He gave her precise instructions before the child existed. That son was to abstain from wine and fermented drinks. He could eat nothing impure. He could not cut his hair. 3 concrete restrictions. 3 pillars of his covenant with God. Manoah, the father, asked that the angel return. He wanted to hear it for himself. The angel came back. In Judges chapter 13, verse 17, Manoah asked his name. The angel replied that it was beyond understanding. Then something extraordinary happened. Manoah offered a young goat as a sacrifice. The flame rose from the altar. The angel of the Lord ascended within that flame. Judges chapter 13, verse 20, describes it with precision. Manoah and his wife fell face down. Manoah believed they would die for having seen God. His wife reasoned with greater clarity. If God had wanted to kill them, he would not have accepted the sacrifice. Samson was born. He grew. The Lord blessed him. Judges chapter 13, verse 24, says that the Spirit of God began to move in him from his youth. The first recorded act of his superhuman strength occurred in Timnah. Judges chapter 14, verse 6. A young lion came toward him. Samson tore it apart with his bare hands, as one tears apart a young goat. He carried no weapon. He told his parents nothing. He did it as though it were nothing. That detail reveals something about his character from the very beginning. Timnah was Philistine territory. His parents did not approve of him seeking a wife there. But the text says something unsettling in Judges chapter 14, verse 4. This had come from God. He was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Samson's wedding was a battlefield from the start. He proposed a riddle to 30 Philistine companions during the feast. If they solved it within 7 days, he would give them 30 garments and 30 changes of clothing. The riddle was about the lion he had killed. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. He had found a honeycomb inside the carcass of the animal, in Judges chapter 14, verse 8. The Philistines could not solve the riddle. They threatened Samson's wife. They told her they would burn her and her family if she did not give them the answer. Judges chapter 14, verse 15. She wept before Samson for 7 days. She accused him of not loving her. He finally gave in. She revealed the answer to her countrymen. The betrayal began there. The Philistines gave the correct answer on the 7th day. Samson responded with fury. In Judges chapter 14, verse 18, he told them that if they had not plowed with his heifer, they would not have found his riddle. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him with power. He went down to Ashkelon. He killed 30 Philistine men. He took their garments and gave them to those who had answered the riddle. Then he went back to his father's house, burning with anger. His father-in-law gave his wife to another man. He had assumed Samson had abandoned her. Judges chapter 15, verse 2. When Samson returned with a young goat as a gift, his father-in-law blocked his way. He offered him the younger sister instead. Samson refused. Then he acted in a way no one expected. He caught 300 foxes. He tied them in pairs by their tails. He fastened torches between each pair. He released them into the fields of the Philistines. Judges, chapter 15, verses 4 and 5. The standing grain burned. The vineyards burned. The olive groves burned. One man caused a massive agricultural catastrophe in enemy territory. The Philistines found out who had done it. They went directly for Samson's father-in-law and wife. They burned them. The very threat they had used to manipulate her became their own fate. Samson struck back. He attacked them fiercely, says Judges chapter 15, verse 8. Then he went to live in the cave of the rock of Etam. The Philistines moved against Judah. They demanded that Samson be handed over. 3,000 men of Judah went to speak with him. They told him that the Philistines ruled over them. They asked him why he was causing them trouble. Samson agreed to let himself be bound. He asked only one condition, that they themselves would not attack him, that they simply hand him over. Judges chapter 15, verse 12. They bound him with 2 new ropes. They led him to the Philistines at Lehi. When the Philistines came shouting in triumph, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with violence. The ropes became like burned flax. They dissolved in his hands. Judges chapter 15, verse 14. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey on the ground. With it, he killed 1,000 men. Not 100, not 200, 1,000 armed men, killed by one man with a bone. Afterward, he was overcome with extreme thirst. He prayed to God in Judges chapter 15, verse 18. He said he had achieved that great victory, but that he would die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. God opened a hollow in the ground. Water sprang forth. Samson drank, and his strength returned. The place was called En-Hakkor, meaning the spring of the one who cried out. It exists to this day in Lehi. He judged Israel for 20 years. That fact appears in Judges chapter 15, verse 20. He was not only a warrior, he was a judicial authority over the nation. Then came Gaza. Samson went to see a prostitute in that Philistine city. Judges chapter 16, verse 1. The people of Gaza found out immediately. They surrounded him all night. They waited at the city gate. Their plan was to kill him at dawn. At midnight, Samson rose. He took hold of the city gates, both posts and the bar. He hoisted them onto his shoulders. He carried them to the top of the hill facing Hebron. Hebron is roughly 60 kilometers from Gaza. The gates of an ancient city could weigh several tons. The image is nearly beyond comprehension. Then came Delilah. Judges chapter 16, verse 4. Samson fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek. Her name was Delilah. The 5 leaders of the Philistines approached her. Each one offered her 1,100 pieces of silver, 5,500 pieces in total. If she discovered the secret of his strength, the reward would be hers. Delilah began the interrogation without pretense. She asked him directly what his secret was. Judges chapter 16, verse 6. She did not attempt to be subtle. Samson lied the first time. He said that if he were tied with 7 fresh bowstrings, he would lose his strength. The Philistines were hidden in the room. Delilah tied him while he slept. She called out to the Philistines. Samson snapped the bowstrings as though they were threads. Delilah confronted him. She told him he had mocked her. She asked again. Samson lied a second time. He said that new ropes never before used would weaken him. They repeated the process. The ropes snapped just the same. The third time Samson said that if she wove the 7 locks of his hair into the loom, he would become weak. Delilah did it while he slept. She fastened it with the pin. She called out to the Philistines. Samson woke and pulled out the pin and the loom. Judges chapter 16, verse 16. Delilah pressed him every day. Her words wore him down to death. The text uses that exact phrase, to death. Finally, Samson gave in. He revealed his whole heart to her. He told her that no razor had ever touched his head, that he had been a Nazirite to God from his mother's womb. If his head were shaved, his strength would leave him. Delilah recognized that this time it was true. She summoned the Philistine lords. She told them to come, because Samson had revealed his secret to her. Judges chapter 16, verse 18. Samson fell asleep on Delilah's lap. She called for a man. She had the 7 locks of his head shaved. She began to torment him. His strength left him. Then she said the Philistines were upon him. Samson woke, thinking he would break free as before. Verse 19 of chapter 16 of Judges contains the most devastating words in the entire account. He did not know that the Lord had departed from him. He did not know. That ignorance is the true weight of the fall. The most terrible thing was not Delilah's betrayal. It was that Samson did not even perceive the absence of God. The Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes in Gaza. They bound him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding in the prison. A judge of Israel, reduced to a blind slave in enemy territory. Grinding grain was the work of slaves and animals. It was the deepest degradation a conqueror could inflict on an enemy. The Philistines made him turn like a beast of burden. But Judges chapter 16 verse 22 says something that shifts the direction of the story. Samson's hair began to grow back after it had been shaved. The Philistine rulers gathered their people for a great celebration. They wanted to offer sacrifice to their god Dagon. They wanted to celebrate that their God had delivered Samson into their hands. Judges chapter 16 verse 23. Dagon was a Philistine deity of Canaanite origin. His name possibly derives from the Semitic word for grain. He was one of the most important gods in the Philistine pantheon. He was worshipped in temples from Gaza to Ashdod. The crowd shouted when they brought Samson into the temple. They made him perform before them for their entertainment. They used him as a spectacle. The man who had killed 1,000 warriors was turned into amusement. The temple was full. On the roof, there were about 3,000 people watching from above. Judges, chapter 16, verse 27. Men and women, all the Philistine rulers present. Samson asked the young boy, guiding him to let him touch the pillars. He wanted to lean against them. He wanted to rest, he said. Judges chapter 16, verse 26. Then he prayed. Samson's final prayer is recorded with precision. In Judges chapter 16, verse 28, he asked God to remember him. He asked to be strengthened just one more time. He asked to avenge his 2 eyes against the Philistines. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for a second life. He did not ask for mercy for himself. He asked for the strength to die with his enemies. That prayer is not the prayer of a movie hero. It is the prayer of a broken man who still knows to whom he can turn. He grasped the 2 central pillars of the temple, the pillar on his right with his right hand, the pillar on his left with his left hand. Judges, chapter 16, verse 29. He said, "Let him die with the Philistines." He pushed with all his strength. The pillars gave way. The temple collapsed on the rulers and on all the people inside. Those Samson killed in his death were more than those he had killed in his life. That is what Judges chapter 16 verse 30 says. Not as metaphor, as recorded fact. His brothers and all his father's household came down to retrieve him. They carried him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the tomb of his father Manoah. Judges chapter 16 verse 31. The same place where he had grown up. The valley where the Spirit of God had first begun to move in him. He ended where he began. The New Testament includes him among the heroes of faith. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 32 names Samson alongside Gideon, Barak, Jephthah, and David. It does not exclude him for his failures. It records him for his faith. That inclusion is theologically significant. The Bible does not present Samson as a model of purity. It presents him as evidence that God can use broken instruments. The temple of Dagon that collapsed was not a minor building. Archaeological excavations at Tel Qasil and at Ashdod have uncovered Philistine temples with central wooden column structures, exactly the type of architecture that would make a building vulnerable to collapse if its main supports were removed. The design matches the biblical description. 2 central columns bearing the weight of a roof, capable of holding thousands of people. Archaeologists have found that structural pattern throughout the Philistine region of the Iron Age. The story of Samson spans chapters 13 through 16 of the book of Judges. 4 complete chapters. More narrative space than almost any other judge. That is not accidental. His life is a complete cycle. Supernatural calling, extraordinary gifts, repeated moral failures, abandonment of God, literal and spiritual blindness, return in the final crisis, death as victory. That cycle is not only his personal story, it is the pattern of Israel throughout the entire period of the Judges. The chosen people received gifts, fell, were oppressed, cried out, were delivered, and fell again. Samson is Israel in miniature, and that, more than his physical strength, is what makes his story permanent in the sacred text. But there is a dimension that modern readers tend to overlook. Samson never led an army. He never organized a rebellion. He never summoned the tribes of Israel. He always acted alone. That is deliberate in the text. Judges, chapter 15, verse 11, is devastating. The men of Judah ask Samson whether he does not know that the Philistines rule over them. There is no resistance. There is resignation. Israel had accepted oppression as a normal condition. Samson had no nation willing to fight behind him. He had only God and his own weak flesh. That changes the reading of his entire life. He was not a general without an army. He was a lone man against a system of domination that his own people had accepted. The text of Judges chapter 13, verse 1, confirms it from the beginning. Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. 40 years of occupation before Samson was born. An entire generation raised under foreign rule, with no living memory of freedom. Into that context, the miracle child was born. His mother was barren. In the Bible, that is never a minor detail. Barren mothers, who conceive in Scripture, follow a recognizable pattern. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah. The son born from that impossibility always carries a purpose that transcends the ordinary. The angel, who announced Samson's birth, appeared twice, first to the woman alone. Judges, chapter 13, verses 3 through 5. Then, when Manoah pleaded to see him, he returned. Judges chapter 13, verses 9 through 14. Manoah did not recognize that he was an angel. He asked his name. The reply is both precise and mysterious. He said his name was Wonderful. Judges chapter 13, verse 18. That same word, wonderful, appears in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. The name of the son who would be born of a virgin. A coincidence that theologians have not ignored. When Manoah offered a sacrifice, the angel ascended in the flame of the altar. Judges chapter 13, verse 20. He did not walk away. He rose in the fire. Manoah fell on his face. He believed they would die because they had seen God. It was his wife who reasoned with greater clarity. If God had wanted to kill them, he would not have accepted the sacrifice. Judges chapter 13, verses 22 and 23. That unnamed woman showed more theological discernment in that moment than her own husband. The text does not conceal it. Samson's Nazirite vow was different from the voluntary Nazirite vow described in Numbers chapter 6. His was imposed before his birth, without his consent, from the womb. That has implications that go beyond biography. God set that man apart for a purpose before that man could choose anything, and yet Samson constantly chose against that purpose. The tension between divine election and human freedom is woven into every chapter of his life. His first recorded conflict is a marriage. He wants to wed a Philistine woman from Timnah. His parents object. They ask whether there is no woman among their own people. Judges chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. Samson insists, and the text adds something that changes the meaning of the entire scene. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Judges chapter 14, verse 4. What appeared to be disobedience was an instrument. What appeared to be carnal weakness was a strategic movement of God. not as an approval of sin, but as sovereignty over it. That distinction is crucial. The Bible does not say Samson did well. It says God acted through what Samson did wrong. On the way to Timnah, a lion attacked him. Judges chapter 14, verse 5. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him with power. He tore the lion apart with his hands, as one tears apart a young goat, with nothing in his hand. That phrase, with nothing in his hand, appears twice in the same verse. The text repeats it to underscore that the strength came not from any instrument. It was supernatural. When he returned days later, the lion's carcass had a honeycomb inside it. Judges chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. Samson ate the honey. He gave some to his parents, without telling them where it came from. Some interpreters note that touching a carcass violated Nazirite purity. Samson did it anyway. The honey obtained through that contact was already impure by law, and yet he shared it. The episode became a riddle. Judges chapter 14, verse 14. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. 30 men at the feast had 7 days to solve it. If they could not, they owed him 30 changes of clothing. If they could, he owed them the same. They could not solve it. They threatened Samson's wife. They said they would burn her and her family. Judges chapter 14, verse 15. She pressed Samson until he revealed the answer. The wife gave the Philistines the solution. Judges chapter 14, verse 17. Samson responded with a line that was recorded. He said that if they had not plowed with his heifer, they would not have found his riddle. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him again. Judges chapter 14, verse 19. He went to Ashkelon. He killed 30 men. He took their clothes and gave them as payment. Then he returned to his father's house. Ashkelon was one of the 5 principal cities of the Philistines. It was no minor town. Samson entered the heart of enemy territory and acted with total impunity. That is the recurring pattern. Provocation, disproportionate retaliation, an escalating cycle of violence. But each escalation weakened the Philistines and fulfilled the divine purpose of Judges chapter 13, verse 5, to begin to save Israel from the hands of the Philistines. To begin, not to finish. Samson was the start of a process. David and Samuel would complete what he initiated. The Bible is precise with that verb. It does not say Samson would save Israel. It says he would begin to save them. His mission had a defined scope, and he fulfilled it within that scope, in spite of everything. Then came Delilah. Judges chapter 16, verse 4. The text says simply that Samson loved a woman in the valley of Sorek. Her name was Delilah. The valley of Sorek lay in borderland between Israel and Philistia. It was not fully Philistine territory, but Delilah was accessible to the Philistine leaders. That was enough. The 5 rulers of the Philistines went to her. Each offered her 1,100 pieces of silver. Judges chapter 16, verse 5. 5,500 pieces of silver in total for the secret of Samson's strength. That sum was enormous. It was no minor reward. It was a fortune, capable of changing entire lives. Delilah accepted. There is no ambiguity in the text. She acted deliberately from the beginning. 3 times she asked Samson the secret of his strength. 3 times he deceived her. Judges chapter 16, verses 7, 11, and 13. New bowstrings, unused ropes, weaving his hair into the loom. 3 times the Philistines waited in hiding. 3 times Samson freed himself without effort. 3 times Delilah played the betrayal, and he stayed. Then she used the same weapon as the wife of Timnah. Judges chapter 16, verse 16. She pressed him every day. She wore him down until his soul longed for death. That phrase is clinical and brutal. The Bible does not romanticize what happened. Samson reached a point of total emotional exhaustion. And then he spoke. He revealed that from his mother's womb, he had been a Nazirite to God, that if his head were shaved, his strength would disappear. Judges chapter 16, verse 17. The hair was not the magical source of his power. It was the outward sign of the Nazirite covenant with God. Cutting it was not an act of grooming. It was the visible rupture of a divine consecration. Delilah lulled him to sleep on her lap. She called a man to shave the 7 locks of his head. Judges chapter 16, verse 19. 7 locks. The text is specific. And then appears the most silent and devastating line in the entire story. Judges chapter 16, verse 20. Samson awoke and said he would go out as before and free himself, and he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. He did not know. Those 2 words contain the whole tragedy. The withdrawal of God was silent. No thunder, no visible signs, only absence. The Philistines seized him at once. They gouged out his eyes. Judges chapter 16, verse 21. They brought him to Gaza. They bound him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding in the prison. Gaza was the city where Samson had torn out the gates before. Judges chapter 16, verses 2 and 3. The Philistines brought him to the exact place where he had most humiliated them. That detail is not accidental. The text records it with deliberate precision. But the text adds something more. Judges chapter 16, verse 22. The hair of his head began to grow back after it had been shaved. The covenant had not been permanently destroyed. The consecration could be restored. The regrowth of the hair was a sign that God had not fully closed the door. The Philistines celebrated. They gathered their lords to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god. Judges chapter 16, verse 23. Dagon was the chief deity of the Philistines, a god of agriculture and grain in Canaanite tradition. They attributed the victory over Samson directly to Dagon. The text records their exact words. Our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. It was a direct theological declaration, a challenge between deities. Dagon against the God of Israel. The outcome of Samson was being presented as evidence of Philistine divine superiority. The celebration gathered 3,000 people on the roof of the temple. Judges chapter 16, verse 27. Men and women, all the rulers of the Philistines, the entire elite present in one place. Samson asked a young man to guide him to the central columns of the building. Judges chapter 16, verse 26. Then he prayed. It is the second recorded prayer of Samson in the entire book. Lord God, remember me. Strengthen me, just this once. Judges chapter 16, verse 28. The request is direct, brief, and unadorned. He pushed the 2 central columns. The building collapsed on the rulers and on all the people inside. Judges chapter 16, verse 30. The text says something specific. Those he killed in his death were more than those he had killed in his life. That is Samson's final accounting. Not an exemplary life, not a model of Nazirite virtue, but an instrument that produced its greatest impact at the moment of its most apparent weakness. The Philistines recovered his body. Judges chapter 16, verse 31. His brothers and all his father's household came down for him. They were not present in the temple. That is significant. Samson's family had survived. They brought him back. They buried him in the tomb of his father Manoah, between Zorah and Eshtaol. Those are the same places mentioned at the beginning of his story. Judges chapter 13, verse 25. The geography closes the account with deliberate precision. He began in that land. He ended in that land. The text also records that he judged Israel 20 years. Judges chapter 16, verse 31. That fact had appeared before, in chapter 15, verse 20. The narrator repeats it here, as official confirmation. 20 years is a full term of judgeship within the patterns of the book of Judges. It was not cut short by his captivity. The text does not subtract that time. Now it is necessary to understand where Samson fits within the broader chronology. The book of Judges covers an approximate period of 300 years. The text itself establishes this, in Judges chapter 11, verse 26. Samson operates in the final stage of that period, immediately before the monarchy. He is the last recorded judge before Samuel. That is no minor detail. It means the state of Israel under Samson was the state that preceded the political reorganization of the kingdom. The Philistines were not a minor enemy. They were a confederation of 5 cities with superior military technology: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. Joshua chapter 13 verse 3 enumerates them with precision. They held the monopoly on iron in Canaan. 1 Samuel chapter 13 verse 19 confirms it. There was no blacksmith found throughout all the land of Israel. That means Israel fought with inferior equipment throughout the entire period of Samson. The extraordinary physical strength of one man compensated for a technological disadvantage borne by an entire nation. The text does not state this explicitly as analysis, but all the data is there, aligned with historical precision. There is another element the story of Samson introduces that most readers overlook: the angel who announced his birth to Manoah and his wife in Judges chapter 13 did not give his name. Manoah asked directly. Judges chapter 13, verse 17. "What is your name?" The angel's reply was precise. "My name is Wonderful." Judges chapter 13, verse 18. That word in Hebrew is peli. The same root appears in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, applied to the Messiah. Wonderful Counselor. It is not an irrelevant lexical coincidence. The writers of the Hebrew text controlled vocabulary with theological exactness. The conception of Samson came accompanied by a messenger, whose name connects to messianic terminology. That places his birth within a framework of greater promise. His mother is identified as barren. Judges chapter 13, verse 2. That pattern repeats in Scripture, with frequency that is not accidental. Sarah was barren. Genesis chapter 11, verse 30. Rebekah was barren. Genesis chapter 25, verse 21. Rachel was barren. Genesis chapter 29, verse 31. Hannah was barren. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 2. Every time Scripture records barrenness, the son who is born fulfills a specific function in the divine plan. The pattern is not literary, it is theological. Samson belongs to that list. His birth was not biologically ordinary. It was an intervention recorded with the same markers as other births of significance in the history of Israel. Now, Samson's Nazirite vow was not voluntary. Judges chapter 13, verse 5 establishes it before his birth. The child would be consecrated from the womb. That distinguishes him from other biblical Nazirites. Numbers chapter 6 describes the Nazirite vow as a personal and temporary decision. Samson never chose it. It never had an end date. There were 3 central prohibitions of the vow: no wine or vinegar, no contact with corpses, no cutting of the hair. Numbers chapter 6, verses 3 through 5. Samson violated at least 2 of the 3 in documented fashion. He touched the lion's carcass in Judges chapter 14, verse 9. He participated in a Philistine wedding banquet that the original Hebrew text calls a mishteh, a word implying alcoholic drink. That does not invalidate him theologically, it complicates him. And Scripture does not conceal that complexity. The Spirit of God fell upon Samson at specific moments. Judges chapter 14, verse 6. Judges chapter 14, verse 19. Judges chapter 15, verse 14. The exact expression is tzalach, meaning to rush or burst forward with force. The same verb appears over Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 6, and over David in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 13. It was not a permanent force residing in Samson. It was a force that descended in moments of specific divine purpose. That explains why Delilah could not identify the source of the power on her own. The strength was not constant or outwardly predictable. It was sovereign. The Philistines paid Delilah 1,100 pieces of silver each. Judges chapter 16 verse 5. There were 5 Philistine chiefs. The total was 5,500 pieces of silver. That figure is extraordinary. The sum surpasses the ordinary ransom of any transaction recorded in the period. Samson represented a threat of such magnitude that the Philistines were willing to bankrupt themselves economically to neutralize him. Delilah interrogated him 4 times. Judges chapter 16, verses 6 through 17. Samson's first 3 answers were false. The 4th time he told the truth. The text says, she pressed him every day with her words. Judges chapter 16, verse 16. The Hebrew word is tzuk. It means to press hard, to oppress, to constrict. It was not gentle persuasion. It was deliberate exhaustion. Samson was not naive. He was broken by accumulation. That distinction matters for understanding the account with precision. When his hair was cut, the text says something that is rarely analyzed. Judges chapter 16 verse 20. Samson did not know that the Lord had departed from him. That ignorance is part of the judgment. It is not a minor detail. The Philistines gouged out his eyes. Judges chapter 16 verse 21. The Hebrew uses the verb nakar, which implies violent piercing or extraction. They brought him to Gaza, bound in bronze. They set him to grinding in the prison. Gaza was the city where Samson had torn out the gates before. Judges chapter 16 verses 1 through 3. The Philistines humiliated him in the very place where he had humiliated them. But the text adds something more. Judges chapter 16 verse 22. The hair of his head began to grow back after it had been shaved. The covenant had not been permanently destroyed. The consecration could be restored. The regrowth of the hair was a sign that God had not fully closed the door. The Philistines held a feast in honor of Dagon. Judges chapter 16 verse 23. They called him their god. They attributed the capture of Samson to him as a religious victory. That turned the matter into a confrontation between deities, not just between armies. The temple of Dagon had central columns that supported the structure. Archaeologists have identified Philistine temples from the period with that exact design. 2 central load-bearing columns, separated by a distance a man with outstretched arms could span. Samson asked God for one thing. Judges chapter 16 verse 28. Strength, one more time. Just one more time. That prayer is one of the briefest and most direct in the book of Judges. No liturgy, no elaboration, only the specific request of a specific man at a specific moment. The answer was immediate. The columns gave way. The building collapsed on 3,000 people on the roof. Judges chapter 16 verse 27. And on everyone inside. The text says those he killed in his death were more than those he killed in his life. Judges chapter 16 verse 30. That line is not rhetorical. It is a comparative count that Scripture records without exaggeration. Samson judged Israel 20 years. Judges chapter 15 verse 20. And Judges chapter 16 verse 31 repeats it. The exact repetition of that figure is a deliberate textual confirmation. It is not an editorial error. It is a seal of chronological precision. The author of Hebrews includes him in the list of faith. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 32. Without extended explanation, only his name among those who acted by faith. That final judgment on Samson is not rendered by any modern commentator. It is rendered by the sacred text. His body was claimed by his family. Judges chapter 16 verse 31. His father's name was Manoah. They buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol. That is the same territory mentioned at the beginning of his story. Judges chapter 13 verse 25. The place of his birth and the place of his burial are the same. That is not literary symbolism. It is verifiable geography in the territory of Dan. The tribe of Dan was already in conflict with the Philistines before Samson. Judges chapter 1, verse 34, describes the pressure they faced. Samson did not arise in a vacuum. He arose at the exact point of greatest territorial tension. The angel who announced his birth used the term Nazirite from the womb. Judges chapter 13, verse 5. That specific designation has roots in Numbers chapter 6. The Nazirite vow was normally temporary and voluntary. In Samson, it was permanent and prenatal. No other judge in the book of Judges has an angelic birth announcement. Only Samson. That places him in a distinct textual category within the same book. Samson's mother received the revelation first. Judges chapter 13, verses 3 through 5. Manoah was not present. When Manoah pleaded to see the angel, he returned, but he appeared again to the woman. Judges chapter 13, verse 9. That detail is not accidental. The angel did not eat the food Manoah offered. Judges chapter 13, verse 16. He ascended in the flame of the altar. Judges chapter 13, verse 20. Manoah then knew it was the angel of the Lord. The expression angel of the Lord in the Old Testament generates significant theological debate. Several scholars identify it as a pre-incarnate manifestation of the Son. The text does not resolve it with a direct statement, but neither does it deny it. Samson is the only character in the book of Judges whose story occupies 4 complete chapters, 13 through 16. No other judge receives that extended narrative treatment. That reflects a clear editorial intention within the Hebrew canon. The first recorded action of Samson, as an adult, is not a battle. It is a wedding. Judges, chapter 14, verse 1. He went down to Timnah and saw a Philistine woman. He told his parents he wanted her as his wife. His parents objected. Judges chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. They asked whether there was no woman among their own people. Samson's reply was direct. He said, "She was the one who pleased him." The text then adds something that changes the entire reading. Judges chapter 14, verse 4. It says this, "was from the Lord," that God was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. The marriage was not a spiritual error. It was an instrument of divine judgment. That creates real theological tension. Samson appears to disobey Mosaic law. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through 3, prohibits marriage with Canaanites. But the biblical narrator places God's purpose behind that very action. On the way to Timnah, a lion attacked Samson. Judges chapter 14, verse 5. The text says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with power. He tore the lion apart with his bare hands, with nothing in his hand. That phrase, "with nothing in his hand," appears twice in the same verse. The text repeats it, to underscore that the strength did not come from any instrument. It was supernatural. Days later, he returned by the same road. He found the lion's carcass. Inside was a swarm of bees and honey. Judges, chapter 14, verse 8. He ate the honey and continued on. This, too, he did not tell anyone. At the wedding feast, he proposed a riddle. Judges, chapter 14, verse 12. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. He offered 30 garments and 30 changes of clothing, if they solved it in 7 days. The Philistines could not solve it. They threatened Samson's wife. They said they would burn her and her family. Judges chapter 14, verse 15. She pressed Samson until he revealed the answer. The wife passed the solution to the Philistines. Judges chapter 14, verse 17. Samson responded with a statement that was preserved in the record. He said that if they had not plowed with his heifer, they would not have found his riddle. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him once more. Judges chapter 14, verse 19. He went to Ashkelon. He killed 30 Philistine men. He took their garments and handed them over as payment. Then he returned to his father's house. Ashkelon was one of the 5 principal cities of the Philistines. The others were Gaza, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 17 lists them. Samson penetrated the heart of enemy territory to settle a debt. The woman's father had assumed Samson abandoned her. he gave her to another man. Judges chapter 15, verses 1 and 2. When Samson returned intending to reconcile, he no longer had a wife. Samson responded by catching 300 foxes. Judges chapter 15, verse 4. He tied them tail to tail in pairs, with torches fastened between each pair. He released them into the Philistine fields. The vineyards, the olive groves, and the standing grain burned. The Philistines traced the fire back to its origin. They discovered the connection to Samson. Then they burned the woman and her father. Judges chapter 15, verse 6. The very threat they had used against her was turned against her. Samson declared he would not rest until he had taken revenge. Judges chapter 15, verse 7. The cycle of retaliation deepened. Each action generated a more violent reaction. The text documents it without softening it. Samson attacked the Philistines with great force. Judges chapter 15, verse 8. The text says he struck them hip and thigh. That expression indicates a total and systematic slaughter. Afterward, he withdrew to the cave of the rock of Itam. The Philistines did not leave him alone. They marched against Judah with an army. Judges chapter 15, verse 10. They camped at Lehi. They demanded that Judah hand Samson over. 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cave. Judges chapter 15, verse 11. Not to defend him, to bind him and deliver him. They told him the Philistines ruled over them. Samson negotiated a single condition. Judges chapter 15, verse 12. He asked that they themselves not attack him. He accepted being handed over bound. They led him to the Philistines at Lehi. The Philistines shouted in triumph. Judges chapter 15, verse 14. At that exact moment, the Spirit of the Lord came down upon him. The ropes binding him melted like flax, scorched by fire. The text uses that specific image. They did not snap by force. They dissolved by supernatural power. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey. Judges chapter 15, verse 15. With it, he killed 1,000 Philistine men. One man, one bone, 1,000 documented enemy casualties. Afterward, he recited a 2-line poem. Judges chapter 15, verse 16. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey I have killed 1,000 men. That place received a permanent name. Judges chapter 15, verse 17. Ramath Lehi, meaning the height of the jawbone. The geography of Israel preserved the memory of the event. After the battle, Samson was overcome with thirst. Judges chapter 15, verse 18. He called out to God directly. He said he had won that great victory by divine hand. He said he would die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. God opened a spring in that very place. Judges chapter 15, verse 19. Water came out of the hollow at Lehi. The name of the place was also recorded. They called it En Hakore, meaning the spring of the one who cried out. That spring exists to this day in Lehi. The text says so explicitly. It is not a legend. It is a verifiable geographic reference within the biblical account. Samson judged Israel 20 years. Judges chapter 15, verse 20. This occurred during Philistine domination. It was not a period of peace. It was a constant tension with the enemy. Then came Gaza. Judges chapter 16, verse 1. Gaza was the most powerful Philistine city in the south. Samson entered it and went to a woman. The Philistines found out immediately. They surrounded the city. They waited all night at the gate. Judges chapter 16, verse 2. They planned to kill him at dawn. They believed they had him trapped within their own walls. Samson rose at midnight. He took hold of the city gates along with the 2 posts. Judges chapter 16, verse 3. He tore them loose. He hoisted them onto his shoulders. He carried them to the top of the hill facing Hebron. Hebron is more than 60 kilometers from Gaza. The text does not explain how he transported them. It only records that he did. The distance makes the act even more impossible to explain in human terms. Then came Delilah. Judges, chapter 16, verse 4. The text says simply that Samson loved a woman in the valley of Sorek. Her name was Delilah. That name was etched into history. The Philistine rulers went to her. There were 5 lords. Judges, chapter 16, verse 5. Each offered her 1,100 pieces of silver. The total price was 5,500 pieces, a fortune calculated to destroy one man. They gave her a precise instruction. She was to find out where his great strength lay, and how he might be overpowered and bound. The enemy knew Samson had a secret. They only needed to find it. Delilah began to ask. Judges chapter 16, verse 6. Not once, with calculated persistence. It was a strategy, not a curiosity. Samson lied to her 3 times. First, if he were bound with 7 fresh bowstrings, he would lose his strength. Judges chapter 16, verse 7. The Philistines were hidden in the room, waiting for their moment. Delilah tied him with the bowstrings. She called out that the Philistines were upon him. Judges chapter 16, verse 9. Samson snapped the bowstrings as though they were scorched threads. The trap failed completely. Second lie. New ropes that had never been used. Judges chapter 16, verse 11. Delilah tied him again. The Philistines waited in hiding once more. Samson broke them as though they were threads. Third lie. If she wove his 7 braids into the loom. Judges chapter 16, verse 13. Delilah did it while he slept. She pinned it to the wall. Samson tore the entire loom out when he woke. Each time Delilah said the same thing, that the Philistines were upon him. Each time Samson freed himself without effort. The pattern was obvious. But Samson did not leave her. Then Delilah changed her approach. Judges chapter 16, verse 15. She accused him of not loving her. She used affection as a weapon. She told him he had lied to her 3 times. She pressed him every day. Judges chapter 16, verse 16. The text says his soul was tormented to death. It was not a single night of weakness. It was a prolonged and deliberate erosion. Samson finally gave in. He revealed his whole heart to her. Judges chapter 16, verse 17. He told her that no razor had ever touched his head, that he had been a Nazirite to God from his mother's womb. He told her that if he were shaved, his strength would leave him, and he would become like any other man. That phrase is exact in the Hebrew text. It was not magic. It was a broken, sacred vow. Delilah understood this time it was true. Judges chapter 16, verse 18. She called the Philistine rulers. She told them to come up one more time. They came with the money in their hands. Samson fell asleep on Delilah's lap. She called a man. Judges chapter 16, verse 19. She had the 7 braids of his head shaved. She began to weaken him, and his strength left him. The text is precise on that detail. The strength did not disappear with the first cut. It left when the vow was completely destroyed. The Nazirite consecration was the channel of the divine presence upon him. Delilah cried out again, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." Judges chapter 16, verse 20. Samson woke up. He said he would go out as the other times, and shake himself free. The text adds 4 words that change everything. He did not know that the Lord had departed from him. It was not ordinary spiritual ignorance. It was the result of a process of hardening and betrayal of the vow. The Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes in Gaza. Judges chapter 16, verse 21. They bound him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding in the prison. The strongest man in Israel was blind and in chains. Gaza was exactly where he had torn out the gates. The same place of his previous victory was now the place of his humiliation. The geography of the text is not incidental. It is part of the historical record. But the text does not end there. Judges chapter 16, verse 22. Samson's hair began to grow back. The vow could be restored. The story had not finished. The Philistines prepared a great celebration. Judges chapter 16, verse 23. They gathered their rulers to offer sacrifice to Dagon. Dagon was their principal deity, a god of the Philistines, documented archaeologically in Ugaritic texts. They said their god had delivered Samson into their hands. That declaration was theological. They were claiming that Dagon had conquered the God of Israel. It was a direct provocation to the God of the covenant. The temple of Dagon was full. Judges chapter 16, verse 27. There were 3,000 men and women on the roof. The rulers were present. It was the most important political and religious event of the Philistine moment. They sent for Samson to entertain them. Judges chapter 16, verse 25. They placed him between the columns. The blind man was now the spectacle of his enemies, but he asked to be placed beside the pillars. Samson prayed. Judges chapter 16, verse 28. It is the second recorded prayer of Samson in the entire text. He asked God to remember him, to strengthen him just one more time, to avenge his 2 eyes against the Philistines. He took hold of the 2 central pillars of the building. Judges chapter 16, verse 29. He placed his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. The text specifies that the entire structure rested upon them. He spoke his final recorded words. Let me die with the Philistines. Judges chapter 16, verse 30. He pushed with all his strength. The building fell on the rulers and on all the people inside. The text gives the final count. Those he killed in his death were more than those he had killed in his life. Judges chapter 16, verse 30. That comparison is in the original Hebrew text. It is a fact, not a literary exaggeration. His brothers and all his father's household came down. They recovered his body. Judges chapter 16, verse 31. They buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the tomb of his father Manoah. Both places had been mentioned at the beginning of his story. Zorah and Eshtaol are also mentioned in Judges chapter 13, verse 25. There, the Spirit of God first began to manifest in Samson. The account closes exactly where it began. It is a precise and intentional narrative structure. He judged Israel 20 years. The text repeats it at the end. Judges chapter 16, verse 31. It was not an arbitrary number. It was the official period of his judgeship, recognized by the people. The book of Hebrews includes him in the list of faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. Alongside Gideon, Barak, and Jephthah. The New Testament text does not ignore his failures, but neither does it erase his place in the history of faith. The story of Samson does not end in Gaza. It ends in a list that no human writer would have constructed that way. Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the chapter of faith. Verse 32 names Samson directly. The author does not justify him. He does not explain his failures. He simply places him alongside men who moved armies and shut the mouths of lions. That list includes Gideon, who destroyed an altar to Baal. It includes Barak, who defeated Sisera. It includes Jephthah, whose vow cost him a devastating price. None of them was morally flawless. The text does not pretend otherwise. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 33 says that through faith, they conquered kingdoms and obtained promises. The Greek verb used is katergazomai. It means to work out with sustained effort. It does not refer to a single act, but to a direction of life. Samson was never a conventional military leader. He organized no armies. He signed no treaties. Judges chapter 13, verse 5 establishes it from the beginning. He would begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. The verb is to begin. That word matters. The Hebrew uses yajil, implying the start of a process. The complete liberation would come later, with Samuel, with Saul, with David. Samson was the first link, not the last. The Philistines dominated Israel for 40 years before Samson. Judges chapter 13, verse 1 confirms it. The people had done evil in the sight of God. That phrase appears repeatedly in Judges as a deliberate structural pattern. The cycle in Judges always has 4 phases: apostasy, oppression, crying out, and deliverance. The case of Samson is unusual. The text does not record that Israel cried out. The deliverer was sent before the people asked for help. That theological detail is not minor. Judges chapter 13 does not show a repentant people. It shows a God who acts on his own initiative. Grace precedes merit. The text shows it without explaining it. The angel of the Lord, who appeared to Manoah and his wife, is a figure who appears also at other critical moments of the biblical text. Genesis chapter 16, Exodus chapter 3, Joshua chapter 5. Scholars of the Hebrew text have debated his exact nature for centuries. The wife of Manoah recognized him before her own husband did. Judges chapter 13 verse 22. She said that if God had wanted to kill them, he would not have accepted their sacrifice or revealed all of this to them. Her reasoning has precise logical structure. It is not emotion, it is doctrine. The name Samson in Hebrew is Shimshon. It comes from Shemesh, meaning sun. Some commentators, such as the 12th century rabbi David Kimhi, noted that connection. It is not decorative data. Names in the Hebrew text carry consistent semantic weight. Samson's Nazirite vow was lifelong. Numbers chapter 6 establishes the rules of the ordinary Nazirite vow. It was temporary. Samson's was imposed before his birth. Judges chapter 13 verse 5. That distinction has no exact parallel in the Pentateuch. The three prohibitions of the Nazirite were no wine or strong drink, no contact with corpses, and no cutting of the hair. Samson violated at least two of them in documented fashion in the text. The one regarding wine is implied in his wedding banquet in Judges chapter 14 verse 10. The Hebrew term for that banquet is mishteh. It literally means a place of drinking. It was a wedding feast that lasted 7 days. Samson's presence in that context is part of the record, not an external inference. Yet the Spirit of God continued to come upon him. Judges chapter 14, verse 19. Judges chapter 15, verse 14. The text does not connect the anointing with perfect obedience. It connects it with the divine purpose that remained active. That distinguishes the account of Samson from a hagiography. A hagiography idealizes. The Hebrew text records. It records the contradictions, the impulses, the failures, and it also records that God did not withdraw his hand while the purpose remained unfulfilled. The death of approximately 3,000 people in the collapse of the Temple of Dagon has no direct archaeological confirmation. But archaeology has found Philistine temples with central columns at Tel Kasile and at Tel Mikni, ancient Ekron. The architecture described in the text is culturally coherent with the period. The Bible does not present Samson as a model of personal holiness. It presents him as an instrument of a purpose that exceeded his own understanding. Judges chapter 14 verse 4 says it openly. His father and his mother did not know that this was from God. That sentence is one of the densest in the book of Judges. It means that even the apparently impulsive acts of Samson were being used within a framework that none of the characters in the account saw in its entirety. The book of Judges closes its final chapters with two stories of moral collapse in Israel. The idol of Micah in chapter 17. The rape and death of the Levite's concubine in chapter 19. The editor of the text placed Samson's story just before that collapse. The editorial position of Samson's story is not accidental. He is the last judge before the chaos. His death precedes the moment when the text says, "There was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Judges chapter 21, verse 25. That final line of the book is a diagnosis, not a neutral description. The Hebrew text uses the word yashar, meaning right in one's own eyes. The difference between what is right before God and what is right before oneself is the moral axis of the entire book. Samson died between those two realities. With documented weaknesses, and with a final prayer that the text preserved. He asked to be remembered. The text remembers him. Hebrews chapter 11 remembers him, and 20 centuries later, we are still reading his name. The story of Samson does not end with his death. It ends with a question the text leaves deliberately open. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 32 includes him in the list of those who acted by faith. He stands alongside Gideon, Barak, Jephthah, and David. That list is not a record of moral perfection. It is a record of people who were used within the purpose of God. The author of Hebrews does not explain why he includes Samson. He offers no defense or apology. He names him and moves on. That brevity is significant. The sacred text does not need to justify him, only to point to him. The theology behind that inclusion is consistent with the entire Old Testament. God does not choose perfect instruments. He chooses available instruments within his sovereignty. Moses killed an Egyptian. David ordered the death of Uriah. Rahab was a prostitute. The list is long. The key theological distinction does not rest in the conduct of the instrument. It rests in whether the divine purpose advanced through it. In Samson's case, the text says it did. Judges chapter 15 verse 20 records that Samson judged Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. That detail is usually overlooked. He was not merely an impulsive warrior. He was a judge for 2 decades. The Philistine period over Israel lasted 40 years, according to Judges chapter 13 verse 1. Samson covered exactly half of that period. His ministry was not an isolated episode. It was a sustained presence. The Philistines were not a minor enemy. They controlled access to iron in Canaan. 1 Samuel chapter 13 verses 19 through 22 describes how there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel. Philistine domination was technological, military, and economic all at once. Samson operated in that context without an army, without political alliances, without institutional resources, only with what the Spirit of God gave him at specific moments. The Hebrew text uses the phrase, Vatitzlach alav ruach Adonai. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him with power. That phrase appears in Judges chapter 14 verse 6, in verse 19 of the same chapter, and in chapter 15 verse 14. 3 documented direct interventions. The pattern is not coincidental. The text is building an argument about who was truly acting. The question the book of Judges leaves unresolved is whether Israel learned anything. The structural answer of the text is that it did not. After Samson comes the chaos of chapters 17 through 21. The lesson of the most powerful judge was not absorbed by the people he was supposed to protect. That, too, is theological data. The purpose of God advanced. The human response was insufficient. That tension runs through the entire biblical narrative, from Genesis to the prophets. It is not a literary accident. It is the central theme of the text. Samson was born from a promise. He died fulfilling a prayer. Between those 2 points lie betrayal, strength, failure, restoration, and voluntary death. The text softens none of those elements. It preserves them all with equal precision. The Bible does not write hagiography. It writes history with theological purpose. And in that history, Samson occupies a place that no other character in the book of Judges occupies. He is the only judge whose birth was announced by an angel. He is the only one whose story begins before he was born. That singularity does not make him superior in holiness. It makes him singular in function. And that distinction is precisely what the text wants the reader to see. There is a detail most readers overlook. The angel who announced Samson's birth did not reveal his name. Judges chapter 13 verse 18 records his exact words. He said his name was wonderful. That same word, Pele in Hebrew, appears in Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6, applied to the coming Messiah. The messenger who announced Samson was not an ordinary angel. The text distinguishes him with a specific term. Judges chapter 13 verse 3 calls him Malach Adonai, the angel of the Lord. That figure appears in contexts of direct revelation and covenant throughout the Old Testament. Manoah, Samson's father, made an offering at that encounter. Judges chapter 13 verses 19 through 20 describe what happened. The flame rose toward the sky, and the angel ascended within it. Manoah and his wife fell on their faces. Manoah's reaction was immediate. Judges chapter 13 verse 22. He said they would die because they had seen God. That response was not superstition. It was based on precedent. Genesis chapter 32 verse 30 and Exodus chapter 33 verse 20 establish that principle. It was his wife who reasoned with theological clarity. Judges chapter 13 verse 23. She argued that if God had wanted to kill them, he would not have accepted their offering or revealed all of this to them. That argument has precise logical structure. It is not emotion. It is doctrine. Samson was born in Zorah, a city located on the border between the territory of Dan and the Shephelah, the lowland that gave access to the Philistine coast. The geography is not decorative. Zorah stood literally on the line of contact between Israel and its oppressors. The Spirit began to move in Samson before any recorded act. Judges chapter 13 verse 25 specifies the place. The camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. That territory was a zone of constant pressure. The tribe of Dan never consolidated its original inheritance. Judges chapter 1 verse 34 documents why. The Amorites drove the Danites into the hill country. They would not allow them to come down to the plain. Samson grew up in a displaced tribe, without effective territory, with the Philistine coast as a permanent horizon. His first documented movement was toward Timnah. Judges chapter 14 verse 1. He saw a Philistine woman there and wanted her for a wife. Commentators have debated that choice for centuries. The text answers in verse 4. It was the Lord's doing. That declaration is theologically uncomfortable for modern readers. God using an apparently incorrect marriage choice as an instrument of national purpose. But the text makes no apology for it. It states it with the same neutrality as any other fact. On the way to Timnah occurred the first recorded act of strength. Judges chapter 14 verses 5 and 6. A young lion came at him. Samson tore it apart with his bare hands, as one tears apart a young goat. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in that moment. The text adds a significant detail. He did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. That omission appears twice in the same passage. Judges chapter 14, verses 6 and 9. The text repeats it because it matters. Samson's power was not exhibition. It was instrument. The honeycomb episode in the lion's carcass gave rise to the riddle Samson proposed at the wedding. Judges chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. 30 Philistine groomsmen had 7 days to solve it. The wager was 30 changes of clothing. The Philistines did not solve the riddle through intelligence. Judges chapter 14, verse 15, records the threat. They threatened to burn Samson's wife and her family if she did not reveal the answer. She gave in and drew out the information by weeping through the 7 days of the feast. Samson's response upon being betrayed is preserved in Judges chapter 14, verse 18. He said that if they had not plowed with his heifer, they would not have solved his riddle. That line is more than an insult. It is a diagnosis of the situation. Then the Spirit came upon him again. He went down to Ashkelon, killed 30 Philistines, took their clothing, and paid the wager. Judges chapter 14, verse 19. Ashkelon was one of the 5 principal cities of the Philistine Pentapolis. The response was not local. It was strategic. After that episode, his wife was given to his best man. Judges chapter 14, verse 20. That act set off the next phase. Samson returned with a young goat as a gift. His father-in-law barred his way. and offered the younger sister as a substitute. Samson's response was to catch 300 foxes. Judges chapter 15 verses 4 and 5. He tied them tail to tail in pairs with lit torches, fastened between them, and released them into the Philistine fields. The crops, the olive groves, and the vineyards burned completely. That action follows the logic of deliberate economic warfare. The Philistines depended on those harvests to sustain their regional position. Destroying the fields was striking the material base of their domination. Samson understood the system he was facing. The Philistines responded by burning his wife and her father. Judges chapter 15 verse 6. That did not resolve the conflict. It intensified it. Samson declared he would not stop until he had taken revenge, and he attacked the Philistines with great slaughter. What followed reveals something about the state of Israel. The men of Judah came down to Samson with 3,000 soldiers, not to support him, to hand him over to the Philistines. Judges chapter 15, verses 11 and 12. They told him the Philistines ruled over them. That is documented institutional capitulation. 3,000 Israelite soldiers, acting as a capture force to protect the occupiers of their own people. Samson negotiated the terms. He asked only that they themselves not kill him. He accepted being handed over bound. They brought him bound with 2 new ropes to Lehi. The Philistines shouted when they saw him, and at that exact moment, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him for the 3rd time. Judges, chapter 15, verse 14. The ropes came apart, like flax burned by fire. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey. With it, he killed 1,000 men. Judges, chapter 15, verses 15 and 16. The text preserves the chant he recited in that moment. With the jawbone of a donkey, heap upon heaps. The language is rhythmic and deliberate.